Good morning. So Miss Susan here again for the kids' time of the service. And here I am 2 weeks in a row up here without any props, without any pictures, just me and my words. I just feel like this service, this series seems to lend itself more to storytelling than to the object lessons that I've done in the past. So hopefully the stories are enough to keep the kids engaged for the whole time. So for those who were watching last week, you know that we started a series on Esther. So we just kind of did an overview of the story of Esther last week. And so today we're going to focus in on one of the characters, and that character is Mordacai. So the kids who watched last week, I want you to spend some time right now thinking about who Mordacai was. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a brief summary of the story of Esther for those who weren't watching last week. So Esther is a book in the Old Testament, and it talks about the story of a young woman, a young Jewish woman living in Persia at the time. Her name was Esther. She became the queen of Persia. And it was through her brave actions that she was able to save her people. There had been a plan to destroy, to kill all of the Jewish people who were living in Persia. She was brave and went and told the king about it, and they were able to stop the Jewish people from being killed. So that's kind of a summary of the story. And so now we're going to focus in on Mordacai. So hopefully those kids who were watching last week have had a time to figure out who Mordacai was. So Mordacai was a relative of Esther. So he was an older cousin of Esther, and he took care of Esther. So Esther's parents died when she was younger, and so Mordacai was like a father to her. And so we talked last week about how Esther was the hero of the story, but we're going to find out today that Mordacai was a hero as well. And so we're going to focus in on three things that Mordacai did, three ways that Mordacai took risks in order to do the right thing. So the first one that we're going to talk about happened when Mordacai was visiting the palace. So he was out at the palace gates. Maybe he was coming to check in on Esther and make sure she's doing okay in the palace. But while he was sitting in the gates of the palace, he overheard a plan. So there were a couple of guards there that were talking about their plan to kill the king. And so he's like, I've heard this. I now need to do something about this. So what he does is he goes and he tells Esther, and then she goes and tells the king and tells him that Mordacai was the one who overheard this, and they were able to save the king. So Mordacai didn't even think about the fact that he might be in trouble as a result of doing this, right? So it could well be that the people who were planning to kill the king, maybe they find out that Mordacai is going to go tell the king, and maybe they kill Mordacai instead, right? So it was a risk for him to take, to be going and telling the king this news, but he knew that it was the right thing to do. So that's our first example of Mordacai taking a risk to do the right thing. And then the second example that we have involves the character Haman. So hopefully the kids who were watching last week, remember we talked about Haman. And Haman was the bad guy in the story. And we talked about how Haman did not like Mordacai. But I didn't really explain why he didn't like Mordacai. So we're going to find out today why that was. So Haman ended up having a pretty powerful position within the kingdom, in Xerxes' kingdom, and he was in such a position of power that it was expected that everyone would bow down to him. So if they saw him on the streets, they needed to bow down to him because he was so important and powerful. But Mordacai refused to bow down to Haman. And there were his friends and people around that kept asking him, Mordacai, why aren't you bowing down? Like, you could get in trouble. You need to do this. This is what we're expected to do. We need to be bowing down to Haman. And it's interesting because the Bible doesn't give us a clear answer about why Mordacai didn't bow down to Haman. It just mentions something about the fact that he's a Jew. So maybe the answer that he gave had something to do with the fact that he was Jewish, but it isn't super clear. But there are some things that we can kind of assume and figure out with the information that we've been given. So we know enough about Mordacai's character that we know, we assume at least, that he would be doing this for noble reasons, for good reasons, for honorable reasons, not just like hey, I don't like that dude, so I'm not going to be bowing down to him. That it was for good reasons that he decided to do this. So there's a couple of theories about why he might have not felt comfortable or right about bowing down to Haman. So one possibility is that he might have thought that bowing down to Haman would be like worshiping him as a god. And he knew as a Jewish man that there is only one God that is worthy of worship. So he didn't want to be seen as worshiping Haman. So that's a possibility of why he didn't feel comfortable or okay with the idea of bowing down to Haman. And another possibility is that Haman descended from the Amalekites. And the Amalekites in Israel did not have good history. And like when the Israelites were leaving Egypt, the Amalekites didn't treat them well. So God had actually given them instructions to destroy the Amalekites. So it could be that Mordecai was like, I don't want to honor this man who comes from a line of people who have treated my people so badly. So either way, it's because he thought it was the right thing to do that he chose to do this and not bow down to Haman, even though he knew he could get in trouble for it. And he did get in trouble for it. So this is the whole reason remember last week we talked about how Haman made a plan to destroy all of the Jewish people that were living in Persia. And it was because of the fact that Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him that Haman made that plan. He was so upset that Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him that he was like, I'm not just going to destroy Mordecai, I'm going to destroy all of his people. So there were huge consequences for the fact that Mordecai did that, but he knew he needed to do the right thing. So the third example we have of Mordecai taking a risk in order to do the right thing was something we already talked about last week. So Mordecai and all the Jewish people found out that Haman was planning on killing them or having a plan to have them killed. And he knew he needed to do something about it. So he went to Esther, who was the queen, and said, you need to go and talk to the king. Tell him that you're Jewish, because up until this point in time, she had kept it a secret. Tell him you're Jewish and that your people are in danger. When Mordecai brought that request to Esther, Esther responded with saying, the king hasn't asked me to come and visit him in like a month. And if I go and see him without being invited and he is not happy to see me, then I could be killed. And even though Esther responded that way, Mordecai was like, you still need to do something. It may be this reason why you are queen, for such a time as this, that you have been brought into this position. So Mordecai knew that his adopted daughter could well be killed, and he still knew that he needed to do the right thing. And sometimes worrying about someone you love and the fact that they might get hurt is actually more of a sacrifice than worrying about yourself being killed or being hurt, right? So it was a huge sacrifice for him to be willing to put Esther in that position, but he knew that saving all of the Jewish people was more important than the one person that he loved and cared about so much. So he was willing to take a risk in order to do the right thing. Now, the nice thing we learned last week is that Esther wasn't killed. The king was happy to see her, and she was able to save the Jewish people by being brave and going to see the king. So there are some examples about how Mordecai took risks to do the right thing. Now, I'm sure some of the kids out there are wondering, but how does this pertain to me? Because, I'm not going to be overhearing a plot to kill the king, and I'm not going to be able to have an opportunity to save a whole nation like Canada or something like that. And that's probably true. But we can still learn about the fact that it is good to take risks to do the right thing. There are actually people in the world today who take a risk even just by serving Jesus. That there are some countries where it's not okay to be a follower of Jesus, and they risk their lives for that. So even today, there are people taking risks to do the right thing, but they know it is important for them to be following Jesus. And so we're very blessed in Canada that we do not have that. We're welcome to practice whatever religion we want. But there are still sometimes risks in doing the right thing, or risks in following Jesus. And I think as kids, probably the biggest risk that you might face is being made fun of. So sometimes the popular thing to do is not the right thing to do. So it might be that everyone else is doing the wrong thing, and for you to stand up and do the right thing might not be popular, and it might mean that people make fun of you. But I want you to take this example from Mordecai and know it is good to take that risk and to do the right thing. And there also might be some people that get made fun of just for the fact that they're a Christian and that they believe in Jesus. I know when I was in grade 9, there was a boy in my class who made fun of me for the fact that I was a Christian. And my response to that was that I actually got pretty quiet about the fact that I was a Christian. I didn't stop believing in God, but I didn't talk about it as much. And that wasn't the brave thing to do. That wasn't the risk thing to do. That was me being safe and trying to protect myself. And if I was to follow Mordecai's example, I would continue to be open about the fact that I love Jesus, because that was the right thing to do. So hopefully you can follow Mordecai's example this week instead of my example this week. I know you guys are back in school, and it might take some getting used to being around everyone again after like so many months of online learning. And so it might take some adjustment to getting used to the group dynamics, but I'm hoping that this week you can take an opportunity to take a risk to do the right thing.